There is a reason you keep losing battles with yourself. It's not because you're weak. It's not because you lack discipline. And it's definitely not because you're lazy. The real reason is far more unsettling. Your brain is running on the wrong fuel. Deep inside your nervous system exists a motivation circuit so powerful that when activated, it makes effort feel optional. It doesn't rely on willpower. It doesn't beg for discipline. It doesn't wait for rewards. It pulls you toward hard work. The same way hunger pulls you toward food, most people never turn it on. And that's why they live in a constant cycle of forcing themselves, burning out, starting over, and wondering why motivation never lasts. Today, you're going to learn how to flip that switch. Most people believe motivation is a matter of character. They think the reason they don't follow through is because they're undisciplined, unfocused, or weak. That belief is not only wrong, it's damaging. When you misdiagnose the problem, you attack yourself instead of the system that's failing you. And the system that's failing you is willpower. Willpower is not a renewable resource. It is a short-term cognitive function powered by glucose, dopamine regulation, and prefrontal control. That means it's fragile. It degrades with stress, lack of sleep, emotional load, decision fatigue, and uncertainty. Every time you rely on willpower to force yourself into action, you're gambling with a system designed for emergencies, not sustained performance. This is why motivation feels inconsistent. Some days you wake up ready to dominate the world. Other days, brushing your teeth feels like work. The difference isn't who you are. The difference is how taxed your cognitive control systems are at that moment. Most people try to solve this by stacking external pressure. Deadlines, rewards, punishments, fear, praise, money. These are all forms of extrinsic motivation, and they work in the short term because they hijack the brain's reward system. Dopamine spikes not when you achieve the reward, but when you anticipate it. The moment the reward is attained, dopamine drops. Motivation collapses. The brain says, that's done. What's next? This is why external rewards always escalate. The first raise motivates you. The second excites you less. The third barely moves the needle. Eventually, no reward is enough to generate sustained drive. You're chasing stimulation, not building motivation. Here's the critical mistake. People assume that if extrinsic motivation stops working, they need more discipline. In reality, they need less force and better alignment. When you rely on willpower, every task feels like resistance. Your brain interprets effort as a threat to energy conservation. That's not laziness, it's survival biology. The human brain evolved to minimize unnecessary energy expenditure. If a task doesn't promise immediate reward, meaning, or progress, the brain deprioritizes it automatically. So when you sit at your desk and feel an invisible wall between you and your work, that's not self-sabotage. That's your nervous system saying, this isn't worth the cost. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The brain is usually right. Willpower fails because it works against the brain instead of with it. It attempts to override motivational circuits rather than activating them. That's like trying to push a car uphill when the engine is off instead of turning the key. This is why forcing productivity leads to burnout. You can overpower your biology temporarily, but the bill always comes due. Emotional exhaustion, disengagement, procrastination, anxiety. These are not moral failures. They are symptoms of a system that has been overruled too long. High performers don't rely on willpower. They engineer conditions where action is the path of least resistance. They don't ask, how do I push myself harder? They ask, how do I make this work neurologically rewarding? Once you understand this, everything changes. You stop shaming yourself. You stop trying to white-knuckle your way through life. You stop confusing effort with effectiveness. Motivation isn't about forcing action. It's about removing friction between intention and behavior. The goal is not to become more disciplined. The goal is to stop needing discipline as often. When motivation is intrinsic, action feels natural. Focus becomes automatic. Engagement sustains itself. If willpower were the solution, the most disciplined people would be the most fulfilled. They're not. Many of them are exhausted, resentful, and secretly disengaged. They succeed despite their system, not because of it. So if your motivation keeps collapsing, don't ask what's wrong with you. Ask what fuel you're running on, because the moment you stop relying on willpower and start activating the brain's intrinsic motivational circuits, effort stops feeling like force and starts feeling like pull. And that's where real sustainable drive begins. Most people assume motivation comes from wanting something badly enough: more money, more success, more recognition. But desire alone does not create sustained action. If it did, ambition would be enough. It isn't. What actually determines whether you follow through is the type of fuel your brain is using to move you. There are two motivational systems in the human nervous system. One is reactive, the other is generative. The reactive system is extrinsic motivation. It is triggered by rewards and threats outside of you: money, praise, deadlines, fear of failure, social approval. This system evolved to solve immediate problems. It's effective for short bursts, emergencies, and compliance. But it has a fatal flaw: it is unstable. Extrinsic motivation relies on dopamine spikes created by anticipation. The brain becomes energized when it expects a reward, not when it receives it. The moment the reward is achieved, dopamine levels fall. Motivation drops. The nervous system disengages and begins scanning for the next stimulus. This creates a cycle of chasing, achieving, and immediately feeling empty. This is why external success often fails to produce internal drive. Promotions don't cure procrastination. Money doesn't eliminate resistance. Praise doesn't sustain effort. The brain adapts quickly, and what once motivated you becomes baseline. The generative system is intrinsic motivation. This is where the real power lives. Intrinsic motivation is activated when the activity itself is neurologically rewarding. The brain releases dopamine not because of what the work will get you later, but because of what the work gives you right now: engagement, progress, meaning, autonomy, challenge. When intrinsic motivation is active, effort stops being a cost and starts becoming a source of reward. This is a critical distinction. The brain is not motivated by outcomes. It is motivated by experiences. Intrinsic motivation turns work into an experience worth having. That's why it sustains action without force. From a behavioral intelligence perspective, intrinsic motivation is superior because it aligns behavior with the brain's reward architecture. Instead of bribing or threatening the nervous system into action, it gives the nervous system what it naturally wants: learning, mastery, exploration, and agency. This is also why intrinsic motivation compounds over time. The more you engage in intrinsically rewarding work, the more skill you develop. The more skill you develop, the more capable and confident you feel. The more capable you feel, the more challenging tasks you seek. Each loop strengthens the next. This is not a motivational theory. This is neurobiology. When intrinsic motivation is active, the brain releases a precise cocktail of neurochemicals: dopamine for focus and drive, norepinephrine for alertness, acetylcholine for learning, and pattern recognition. These chemicals don't just make you feel good, they make you effective. Hard work becomes easier, not because the work changes, but because the brain stops resisting it. Extrinsic motivation, by contrast, always leaks. It requires constant reinforcement. It makes you dependent on conditions you don't fully control. And over time, it trains your brain to associate effort with pressure rather than reward. This is why people who rely heavily on extrinsic motivators often feel trapped. Their motivation disappears the moment supervision, deadlines, or rewards are removed. They need external force to stay engaged because the work itself provides none. Intrinsic motivation flips that equation. When you act for the sake of the activity itself, you win regardless of outcome. Success becomes a byproduct, not the fuel. This gives you psychological resilience. You're less reactive to failure, less dependent on validation, and less vulnerable to burnout. From a strategic standpoint, intrinsic motivation is the only system capable of sustaining long-term excellence. It creates internal consistency. It removes friction. It turns effort into a form of self-reinforcement. This is why elite performers don't need to be pushed. They are pulled. The work calls them forward because their nervous system has learned that engagement itself is rewarding. Time collapses. Focus sharpens. Energy stabilizes. This is the state most people mistake for discipline. It isn't. It's better fuel. And once you upgrade your fuel source from extrinsic to intrinsic, motivation stops being something you chase and becomes something you generate on demand. Motivation is not random, it is not mystical, and it is not evenly distributed across tasks. Motivation is mechanical. It follows rules. When those rules are violated, drive collapses. When they are obeyed, motivation appears reliably. At the center of this system are 5 internal levers. These levers determine whether your nervous system leans toward engagement or avoidance. When people say, I don't feel motivated, what they're really saying is that one or more of these levers is disengaged. The first lever is curiosity. Curiosity is not casual interest. It is the neurological tension created by an unanswered question. When curiosity is active, the brain releases dopamine to pull attention toward information. This is why curiosity makes learning feel effortless. You don't need discipline to keep scrolling when something fascinates you. The brain wants closure. It wants understanding. Without curiosity, work ends the moment obligation ends. With curiosity, your mind keeps circling the problem long after you've stepped away. The second lever is mastery. Mastery is the drive to improve skill through progressive challenge. When mastery is active, effort feels purposeful because it creates visible progress. The brain rewards improvement with dopamine and endorphins, the chemical markers of forward motion. Without mastery, work becomes stagnant. You do just enough to survive. With mastery, even repetition feels meaningful because it sharpens competence. This is why athletes, musicians, and high-level professionals obsess over practice long after external rewards are secured. The third lever is autotelic engagement, the love of the activity itself. This is where most people get confused. They assume motivation comes from loving the outcome. It doesn't. Autotelic engagement means the process is rewarding independent of results. When this lever is active, the line between whoa, RK, and play disappears. The brain treats the activity as intrinsically valuable. Without it, every task feels like a transaction. With it, the task becomes its own reward. The fourth lever is purpose. Purpose is meaning applied beyond the self. It answers the question, why does this matter? Purpose connects your effort to something larger than immediate gratification. Neurologically, purpose increases persistence by stabilizing motivation under stress. It activates serotonin and oxytocin, which support long-term engagement and emotional regulation. Without purpose, even enjoyable work can feel empty. With purpose, difficulty becomes tolerable, even desirable. The fifth lever is autonomy. Autonomy is the sense of control over how, when, and why you act. The brain is deeply sensitive to perceived agency. When autonomy is low, motivation collapses because the nervous system shifts into compliance mode. When autonomy is high, engagement increases because the brain experiences ownership. Even small amounts of choice dramatically increase motivation. This is why micromanagement kills drive and self-directed projects ignite it. Here's the critical insight. These levers do not operate independently. They interact. High curiosity with no autonomy creates frustration. High purpose with no autotelic. Engagement creates burnout. High mastery with no curiosity creates mechanical boredom. Motivation fails not because the levers are absent, but because they are misaligned. This is why people can feel deeply passionate about a field, yet dread their daily work. They love the idea, but the activities violate one or more motivational levers. The brain notices this mismatch immediately and responds with resistance. From a behavioral intelligence standpoint, this resistance is not sabotage. It is feedback. The nervous system is signaling that effort is not producing sufficient neurological return. And until that equation changes, no amount of positive thinking will fix it. Elite performers understand this intuitively. They structured their work to activate multiple intrinsic levers simultaneously. Curiosity keeps them exploring. Mastery keeps them sharpening. Autotelic engagement keeps them immersed. Purpose keeps them grounded. Autonomy keeps them invested. When these levers align, motivation becomes stable, predictable, and self-sustaining. This is also why motivation should be diagnosed, not judged. If your drive collapses, the correct response is not self-criticism. It's analysis. Which lever is down? Which one is being constrained? Which one can be adjusted? Once you learn to think in these terms, motivation becomes a design problem rather than a personal failure. And design problems have solutions. You don't need more pressure. You don't need more discipline. You need alignment. When the 5 intrinsic motivators are engaged, effort stops feeling like resistance and starts feeling like movement. And that is when motivation stops being something you wait for and becomes something you can engineer. Most people misunderstand flow. They think it's a rare peak experience reserved for artists, athletes, or geniuses. In reality, flow is not mystical, and it is not accidental. It is a biological state that emerges when specific neurological conditions are met. And once you understand those conditions, flow stops being unpredictable and starts becoming repeatable. Flow is the brain's optimal performance mode. Attention narrows, self-consciousness dissolves, time distorts, action feels effortless, but the real power of flow is not how it feels, it's what it does. In flow, the brain operates at maximum efficiency with minimum perceived effort. Here's the critical insight. Intrinsic motivation is the gateway to flow, and flow, once entered, multiplies intrinsic motivation. This is not a metaphor, it is a measurable feedback loop. When intrinsic motivators like curiosity, mastery, purpose, autotelic engagement, and autonomy are active, the brain releases performance-enhancing neurochemicals. Dopamine for focus and drive, norepinephrine for alertness, acetylcholine for learning, and pattern recognition. These chemicals reduce cognitive noise and increase signal clarity. The brain becomes precise instead of scattered. That chemical state creates the conditions for flow. Once in flow, an even more powerful neurochemical cascade occurs. Endorphins dull pain and fatigue. Anandamide enhances lateral thinking and creativity. Serotonin stabilizes mood and confidence. In social flow states, oxytocin deepens trust and coordination. This cocktail doesn't just feel good, it reinforces the behaviors that produced it. The brain learns this state is valuable, return here. This is where the compounding effect begins. Intrinsic motivation gets you into flow. Flow rewards the brain for being intrinsically motivated. The reward strengthens intrinsic motivation even further. This creates a self-reinforcing loop, a virtuous cycle where engagement feeds performance and performance feeds engagement. Once this loop is active, motivation stops fluctuating wildly. It stabilizes, it deepens, it compounds over time. This is why elite performers appear obsessed. They're not forcing effort. They're repeatedly entering a state their brain finds profoundly rewarding. From a behavioral intelligence perspective, this is one of the most important mechanisms to understand. Humans repeat behaviors that are neurologically reinforced. Flow is reinforcement at the highest level. This also explains why people who briefly taste flow often feel frustrated afterward. Once the brain experiences that level of engagement, anything less feels flat. The nervous system wants back in. If the conditions aren't present, motivation drops. Not because you're broken, but because your brain knows what's possible. Flow also explains long-term excellence. People like elite athletes, scientists, entrepreneurs, and artists are not motivated for decades. Why rewards alone? Rewards plateau. Flow does not. Each time skill increases, the challenge can increase. This preserves the challenge-skill balance, a core trigger for flow. As skill rises, the game gets harder. As the game gets harder, engagement deepens. As engagement deepens, motivation intensifies. This upward spiral is sustainable because it aligns with how the brain is designed to learn and perform. Importantly, flow also lowers cognitive load. When you're in flow, fewer mental resources are wasted on self-doubt, distraction, or emotional regulation. The brain quiets unnecessary processes. This is why flow feels effortless even during intense work. The energy isn't lower, the waste is. Contrast this with forced productivity. When you rely on extrinsic pressure, the brain splits attention between the task and the cost of the task. This increases cognitive load and accelerates fatigue. You're not just working, you're managing resistance. Flow removes resistance. This is also why burnout rarely occurs in people who experience frequent flow. Burnout is not caused by effort. It's caused by effort without reward. Flow provides immediate neurological reward even during difficult work. Understanding this changes how you approach motivation. You stop asking, how do I push myself harder? And start asking, how do I enter flow more often? The answer is not more force. It's better alignment. When intrinsic motivators are active, flow becomes accessible. When flow becomes frequent, motivation becomes self-sustaining. And when motivation compounds, performance accelerates without the psychological cost most people assume is necessary. Flow is not a luxury state. It is a biological efficiency state. And once you learn to activate the loop, intrinsic motivation feeding flow, flow feeding intrinsic motivation, you stop operating on willpower and start operating on design. That's when drive becomes predictable. That's when work becomes absorbing. And that's when sustained excellence becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Most people believe elite performers are driven by extraordinary discipline. That belief is comforting because it implies that if you just try harder, you could match them. But it's also false. The defining difference between elite performers and everyone else is not force. It is architecture. High performers design their lives so motivation is inevitable. They don't rely on emotional intensity. They don't wait for inspiration. They don't constantly negotiate with themselves. Instead, they build systems that repeatedly activate intrinsic motivation and keep them inside the motivation flow loop for years, sometimes decades. This is the core reason elite performers appear unstoppable. They understand that motivation must be self-reinforcing. Once it depends on external validation or short-term rewards, it decays. When it feeds itself, it compounds. From a behavioral intelligence perspective, this is strategic leverage. Man behavior follows reinforcement. The behaviors that are neurologically rewarded are the behaviors that persist. Elite performers don't ask whether something is comfortable or impressive. They ask whether it creates reinforcement. This is why they structure work around progressive challenge. As their skills increase, the difficulty of their work increases just enough to maintain engagement without overwhelming them. This preserves the challenge-skill balance, which is a primary trigger for flow. If the work becomes too easy, boredom appears. If it becomes too hard, anxiety appears. Elite performers live in the narrow channel between the two. They also pursue long arcs of mastery. They choose domains where improvement has no ceiling: business, science, sport, art, engineering. This matters because the brain disengages when it senses stagnation. Endless mastery ensures continuous neurological reward. Another critical distinction is how elite performers relate to outcomes. They care about results, but they are not fueled by them. Their motivation comes from engagement with the process. This makes them emotionally resilient. Failure doesn't collapse motivation because failure does not remove the reward. The work itself remains reinforcing. This is why they can endure setbacks that would demoralize others. Their nervous system is not waiting for approval. It is fed by progress. Elite performers also protect autonomy aggressively. Autonomy is not about rebellion. It is about ownership. When people feel they are acting by choice rather than obligation, engagement rises sharply. High performers structure their lives to maximize control over how and when they work, even when external constraints exist. Where autonomy is limited, they create it elsewhere. Side projects, experimental work, personal standards. This preserves agency, and agency sustains motivation. Perhaps most importantly, elite performers do not moralize motivation. They don't label themselves lazy or virtuous. They treat motivation as data. If motivation dips, they diagnose which intrinsic lever is down. Curiosity, mastery, purpose, autotelic engagement, autonomy. They adjust the system, not the self-image. This mindset prevents the shame spiral that destroys long-term drive in most people. Shame increases cognitive load, narrows thinking, and reduces access to flow. Elite performers avoid this trap by staying analytical. This is why comparisons to others rarely derail them. Social comparison is an extrinsic motivator. It creates anxiety and dependency. High performers stay internally referenced. They measure progress against skill, not status. Over time, this produces a powerful psychological profile. Externally, they appear calm, focused, and unshakable. Internally, they are deeply engaged but emotionally detached from outcomes. They pursue mastery, not applause, purpose, not position. This is often mistaken for obsession. It's not obsession, it's alignment. When intrinsic motivation and flow are locked in, Effort no longer requires justification. Work becomes something you move toward, not something you escape. The need for constant reward, reassurance, or validation fades. This is why elite performers often seem immune to pressure. Pressure loses its power when it is no longer your fuel. The result is a form of psychological independence. Money matters, but it doesn't control behavior. Recognition feels good, but it doesn't steer decisions. Failure stings, but it doesn't paralyze. This is the end state of intrinsic motivation done right. Not intensity, not burnout, not constant hustle, but a quiet, relentless drive that compounds over time. Elite performers are not superhuman. They are simply operating on a motivational system that most people never learn to build. And once you understand that system, excellence stops being mysterious and starts being repeatable. Motivation becomes reliable only when it becomes engineered. Most people wait for motivation to appear, then act. High performers reverse the order. They adjust the system first, and motivation follows automatically. This is not optimism. It is behavioral design. The mistake most people make is trying to fix everything at once. Motivation does not collapse evenly across all domains. It fails at specific pressure points. That means the correct approach is not maximal effort. It is targeted intervention. There are 5 intrinsic motivators at any given time. One of them is almost always the weakest link. That weakest link is where resistance originates. If you strengthen that one lever, the entire system stabilizes. This is how motivation is rebuilt from the inside out. Start with diagnosis. Rate your current work honestly on each intrinsic motivator: curiosity, mastery, autotelic engagement, purpose, and autonomy. Not how you wish it felt, but how it actually feels. Where does your energy leak? Where does resistance appear? The lowest score is your priority. If curiosity is low, your brain does not feel pulled toward the work. That means learning is not translating into meaningful progress. To fix this, you must restore leverage. Learning must create immediate, visible impact. If knowledge does not change outcomes, the brain disengages. Increase curiosity by ensuring that what you learn today improves what you do tomorrow. Immediate feedback is non-negotiable. If mastery is low, effort feels pointless. This happens when improvement plateaus or skills are underutilized. The nervous system disengages when it senses stagnation. To repair mastery, identify the exact skills that would meaningfully increase your effectiveness. Then practice them deliberately at the edge of your competence. Mastery is not repetition. It is calibrated challenge. If you cannot improve within your role, motivation will continue to decay until change becomes inevitable. If autotelic engagement is low, the process itself feels draining. This is where many people misdiagnose passion. They focus on what they like instead of what they are naturally good at. Strengths matter because they reduce cognitive load. When you operate in your strengths, flow appears more easily. Over time, the brain learns to love the activity because it consistently produces rewarding states. Autotelic engagement is often built, not discovered. If purpose is low, work feels hollow. This does not mean you need a grand mission statement. Purpose is simply a clear connection between effort and impact. When tasks feel disconnected from meaning, persistence collapses. To restore purpose, articulate a single, concise reason your work matters. Then consciously link daily tasks to that reason. The brain needs narrative coherence. Without it, motivation fragments. If autonomy is low, resistance is guaranteed. Autonomy is not about total freedom. It is about ownership. Even small zones of control dramatically increase engagement. Identify the smallest part of your work you fully control and expand from there. If literal autonomy is constrained, increase perceived autonomy by placing your current role inside a larger self-directed trajectory. When the brain understands, this is my choice, motivation rises even in difficult conditions. The key principle here is leverage. Raising one intrinsic motivator gives you the energy to raise the others. Motivation compounds upward when momentum is restored. This is why small, precise changes outperform dramatic overhauls. Over time, this becomes intuitive. You learn to read your motivational state the way you read hunger or fatigue. A dip no longer feels mysterious. You know which lever is off and how to correct it. This is what separates people who burn out from people who sustain intensity. Burnout is not caused by hard work. It is caused by misaligned motivation. When intrinsic drivers are active, even extreme effort feels tolerable, sometimes energizing. As intrinsic motivation strengthens, something else happens that most people don't expect. Extrinsic motivation fades. Money, praise, and status lose their emotional grip. This is not apathy. It is independence. External rewards stop controlling behavior because they are no longer the primary fuel source. This creates a rare psychological state. You become deeply engaged but emotionally unattached, focused but unpressured, driven without desperation. You could call it discipline, but it's better than that. It is alignment. When motivation is engineered this way, you stop fighting yourself. Work stops feeling like something you endure and starts feeling like something you enter. Effort becomes voluntary, resistance becomes information, and progress becomes sustainable. This is not about doing more. It is about designing a system where doing is the natural outcome. And once that system is in place, motivation stops being fragile and starts being inevitable. When intrinsic motivation takes over, something extraordinary happens. You stop chasing approval. You stop being controlled by money. You stop fearing failure. You become calm but relentless, detached but deeply engaged, like a monk with a mission, like a warrior who doesn't need permission. Hard work becomes irresistible. Discipline becomes irrelevant. And motivation becomes your default state. Not because you force it, but because your brain finally wants it.